Morning Talk with Siki Mgabadeli.
Call 0891 104 207. SMS 34701.
And it's 7.5 past 10 here on SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader. Just wrapping up our previous discussion on the great Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe. The documentary we're talking about is titled Sobukwe, A Great Soul. It's going to be broadcast on the 20th of March. That's the first part of the two-part series. The second part will be on the 27th of March at 9 p.m. on SABC1. You have no excuses on missing. You can't miss it. You absolutely can't miss it. So let's read some of your SMSs. I'll start with an email from Sam Ditsejo in Kagiso, who says, genetics have confirmed Sobukwe's position theory on race, that all the so-called races are genetically related. Sobukwe and other African thinkers like Cheikh Anta Diop were reacting to the baseless doctrine of white supremacy, which claimed the hierarchy of the races. Thinkers like Sobukwe and Diop debunked that myth. That's from Sam Ditsejo. Some of your SMSs, someone says, black man, you are on your own. And is it Ndlovu? And Alice says, long live the spirit of Prof. Sobukwe. What is the difference between Dr. Peku and Mpatlele according to progress? Are you back at Tammy? Hester says, if Sobukwe and all of us stayed with Christ as a guide, we would have peace and many blessings. All right, those being some of your SMSs. Here's a tweet which I thought was quite funny, from Mungero, who says, Siki, you are speaking to the son of the soil. I like this man, and if I was not a man, I would have fallen in love with him. Thanks, Siki. Thanks, Mungero, for your tweet there. All right, we're going to move on now, talking about something that affects many of us. And that, of course, is our relationship with our banks. Unpacking now the findings of the Speak Up report. It's an insights study that asked South Africans to help reimage banking. It aims to draw attention to what people want from their bank and ultimately help give them what they really need. And the results are very interesting. They show that personal service, so the relationship with the bank manager, makes customers feel valued and not just a number. Bank charges people feel are high and not transparent, and they feel that an increased use of technology among the top changes that consumers wish banks would address. So the big question is, are the banks prepared to listen to what their customers want? I'll give you some of those stats. So 50% of those surveys say that banks make them pay for keeping their cash. And when they were asked about personal service, 47% asked, what is a bank manager again? And what does he do? And 46% of people frustrated with fees and tricky literature, but they won't change banks. That could have something to do with the fact that 42% want a standard menu of fees because they are hard to compare. So we'll hear from you, your relationship with your bank and what you would like to hear. My guests this morning are Advocate Clive Pillay, who is Ombudsman for Banking Services. Paul Crankshaw is Editor of Consumer Affairs with the National Consumer Forum, and Charles Nell is Head of Strategic Communications at Capitec Bank. The Speak Up report was commissioned by Capitec Bank, and we'll take your calls as well on 0891104207, SMSs to 34701. So Advocate Pillay and Paul are in the studio in Johannesburg with me, and Charles on the line in Cape Town. Charles, thank you very much for your time this morning, well as Clive and Paul. Thank you very much to you both as well. Let me start with you, Charles. You commissioned this report. Tell us why.
Well, we wanted to get some insight into, because everybody is saying they're hating their bank, but we wanted to know, what the hate levels are and where are the pressure points. Yeah. And then to understand exactly what's the things that we have in our power to change, and then obviously address those consumer issues. I always use the example, people didn't ask Apple for the iPad. Yeah. Apple listened, and then they went back, put the insights to these research, and then they invented the iPad. And that is our task as bankers. We have to listen, and then we say, these are the things we can do, these are the things we can't do. And then we have to try and do those that we can do as best as possible.
I suppose it's not surprising that people would be unhappy with their bank. We hear people complaining about all sorts of things with their bank. But were there any surprises for you in this research?
There were not major surprises, but what did surprise us was the fact that nearly half, I think it was 46% of people said that they are extremely unhappy. It's not that they are only unhappy, they were extremely unhappy with their bank, but they were not prepared to change. That to us is quite, a finding that we actually don't know how to interpret that and what we can do with that.
That's interesting. I mean, doesn't that tell you that people just feel that all banks are just the same? What's the point? And the effort it takes. I've gone through the exercise of changing banks. The effort that goes into it is actually, you just feel that it's pointless.
But that's what obviously we as banks do not communicate correctly or make it easy to understand for the consumer. Because in fact, most banks have a division that will help you to basically change your debit orders to your new account. And although these messages go out on advertising, it seems like the consumer has blocked messages from banks and are just not prepared to think new about it.
Let me bring in Advocate Pillay into this conversation, Ombudsman for banking services. Just looking at these percentages, does it echo the kind of complaints that you get in your office?
Well, before I answer the question, let me just say that my mandate is to resolve disputes or complaints between banks and their customers. And we do that in an independent, impartial, confidential and speedy manner, and our service is free. But to get to your question, the survey reflects by and large the kinds of complaints that come to our office, which is fundamentally twofold. And the one is predominantly around high bank fees and high bank charges. And secondly, the lack of transparency in literature that makes it difficult for consumers to understand exactly what the product entails.
So often people come to you and say, well, this is something I was charged for and I didn't understand what I was being charged for. Therefore, Mr. Ombudsman sorted out. Yes,
and it's incidentally a finding of the inquiry panel of the Competition Commission that there ought to be more product simplicity, both in terms of product content and product pricing, and that there ought to be more transparency around pricing. So it's a finding made in 2008 after a lengthy inquiry. So once again, nothing new.
So are banks complying, though? I mean, when you see the complaints that come through and you actually go through the literature, do you feel that directive has been followed?
My understanding is that the banks have met with the Minister of Finance and have committed to implementing a number of the recommendations from the inquiry panel. And just to get back to the percentages that Charles mentioned, that approximately 50% of respondents said, we are extremely unhappy with our bank, but have not moved, have not changed banks. But there's now a switching code. It's part of the Code of Banking Practice that takes effect from January this year. And that switching code simplifies to a large extent the process and procedure entailed or involved in switching banks. And so it places an onus and a duty and a responsibility on your bank, and an onus and a duty and a responsibility on the new bank, so to speak.
On average, how many complaints would you say you get a year?
On average, we get over 4,000 complaints a year, but we receive over 38,000 queries, either through the call center We have an in-house call center, and we have a joint call center with the other voluntary ombuds, and we have people who walk in off the street.
Yeah.
So last year we had 38,141 queries, and actual complaints where files were opened, 4,241.
What does that tell you, Paul, of the National Consumer Forum? Are we as consumers aware of our rights? Do we want to complain? Are we willing to take those steps from 31,141 to 4,000 actual cases?
Well, I think it's a good indication that people are waking up to the existence of these institutions, and it should be said that many people still have to be told about the agencies that exist for their protection. And also realizing that these agencies have been in place for a while. The Consumer Protection Act has been a relatively recent thing, but there have been these agencies around. But it does show also this pent-up demand for a resolution service outside of the supplier of the service themselves. That people are not finding they're not finding the results they need or the results they want. They're not finding that their supplier, their company is actually serving their needs, which is very significant.
And how would the Consumer Protection Act actually apply in the banking environment? What are the key things there?
Well, at the moment, there are other laws which deal with the financial side, and Advocate Pillay would probably be better placed than I, but the Consumer Protection Act really focuses on the retail environment, the relationship between buyers and sellers. The Financial Services Act and related acts to that are what really govern the consumer's relationship with their banking institution and their insurance companies and other financial agencies.
Did any of these complaints or the findings resonate with you? What really resonated with you?
Yeah, they certainly did. Firstly, the issue about switching, the fact that people are not happy but they don't switch. This is not a surprising thing for us. We've seen this in research coming out of the United Kingdom, where consumer groups have wanted to show that unless people are able to switch their provider, in this case they looked at banks, then that results in the lack of real competition in that sector. We talk about voting with your wallet and things like that. So it's one thing to have 5 or 6 banks in a country and you can choose any of them, but if it's difficult to move from one to the other, you're effectively stifling the competition which seems to exist.
So the switching code should assist in that.
The switching code looks like a wonderful step forward, because we did our own little study based on what they did in the UK, and we came up with a very similar thing that, of the 40 or 50 people that responded to our very, very, very small spot study, only 3 had actually moved banks. And at the same time, only half of them, almost exactly the same as the Capitec, only half of them were prepared to say they're not moving because they're happy with their bank. Everybody else said, it's too complicated, I don't want to memorize new PIN numbers, I've got all these stop orders attached, I'm not sure what will happen to them. So, I think that switching code which is now coming in is something which is new to many of us.
Yeah.
And I think it's a wonderful it's a wonderful way of pushing competition in the banking sector.
Charles, how big was your sample?
The sample was done on a crowdsourcing platform in Evely, and it's about 725 people, if I remember correctly, that was asked. And then there were also Facebook comments. We posted on Facebook and on Twitter, and then we got information from the social media. So,
in terms of sample, what can you give us some demographics there? What sort of people?
Because it will be people that was online, either mobile or on a normal computer access. So you will have a skew towards the top end of the market, and that will have smartphones and that will have access to online platforms.
All right. I want to talk about service, and we're going to do that in a moment because people are asking, what does the bank manager do? And in fact, I'd like to know as well. Yes. But we're going to take calls on 0891 104 207, 0891 104 207, SMSs to 34701. So Mr. Pillay in East London, stay on the line. We'll come to you in a moment. Talking about banks and their customers, unpacking the findings of the Speak Up report. It was commissioned by Capitec Bank in conversation with the head of strategic communications, Charles Nell. Paul Crankshaw is editor of the Consumer Fair at the National Consumer Forum, and Advocate Clive Pillay is ombudsman for banking services. Some interesting findings here, and one of them, we were just talking about it, one of the respondents suggested that the banks should introduce beautiful can girls to dance at the bank's entrance to entertain clients in the queue, and that would make the jury experience a lot more enjoyable. One Johannesburg mom pointed out that it's tricky to get a pram through the revolving security doors, and suggested that banks consider a queue for moms with prams as well. So clients' comfort was also a concern, especially among the more mature clients who find standing in long queues quite tiring. So to overcome this, respondents suggested that banks offer a granny couch or ample seating in branch. So we're going to talk about that, and we want to hear from you as well. Ask your questions this morning, and we'll take calls on 0891 104 207, SMSs 34701. Before we take the call, Charlotte, I just wanted to hear from you about the personal service, because one of the things that's interesting is that on the one hand, we want technology. We want to be able to do our banks on our phones, on our internet and our iPads and all of that. But also when we walk into the bank, we want someone to greet us and shake our hands and say hello and give us a cappuccino.
It's quite interesting, while technology has made banking quite efficient, it has taken the whole humaneness out of the banking experience. And people are actually longing for that 60s and 70s model where the bank managers still, know your name and they know your situation.
Yeah.
And but they realize that to bring that to you, it will cost money and will also slow down the process. So we need to basically balance that situation between technology and then a real person on the other side that speaks and transacts all for you and with you.
Right. Advocate Pillay, here's a tweet from Ogbob who says, Siki, someone opened a clientele policy using my FNB bank account. Banks should be forced to validate ID numbers before allowing debit orders.
Look, I can't resolve an individual complaint over the radio. I can just talk generally and in terms of principles. The caller is quite right. Banks are obliged to validate personal information. In fact, banks are compelled by law to do so in terms of the Financial Intelligence Centre Act.
Yeah. So that should be done. That should have never happened in the first place.
That should be done as a matter of course.
All right. Let's hear from Mr. Pillay in East London. Hi, Mr. Pillay.
Good morning.
Hi.
Siki, generally in South Africa, when people talk about bank, only two aspects come to their mind. They never worry about the policies or the principle. They worry about the treatment they receive. Number two, the charges.
Yeah.
And if you look at, what is happening at the moment, for example, I personally have been banking with Standard Bank for 15 years. But I was not happy, and I met somebody in FNB. That actually changed me, and I moved because of that lady manager actually assisted me. Sometimes you find that, for example, a place 50 kilometers far from East London, somebody will come to the bank and you will find, no, this paper is not enough. And they are sent back, and this particular person is coming from rural area, does not have a transport, he has to go back. All those things are not taken into care. And the second fact, because there is no time, second factor is that, our banks in South Africa, we are not comparing how the international standards. They are exorbitantly charging. You will find that sometimes 20 rand more taken. You cannot drive the car and spend 20 rand to go and argue for 20 rand. You leave the matter, and they are taking advantage of the situation.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Pillay. We'll talk about that. Bank charges, big issue in this survey as well. Al Roy in Cape Town. Morning.
Good day. I'm calling from an NPO called Operation Hope. And we have a program running called Banking on Our Future, where we go out and teach people the language of money, and through education, in dignity, in financial literacy, and in entrepreneurship. Now, it's very good to hear some of your earlier callers talking about the humane factor, and that is why we underpin all our programming on dignity and where the African people come from and where we are right now. And the masses basically do not know the language of money as used in the banking institutions. So what money means, where does it come from, how do you manage your cash flow, and the dignified sense of banking is how the banks, we work with the city of Cape Town and the city of Johannesburg as well. And some of our banks are really excellent when it comes to the dignified side of offering a service by greeting the people at the doors and ushering them and somebody helping them and explaining to them what interest means. A lot of them don't know how to calculate the interest on certain accounts. I'd just like to know from your panel there, when it comes to helping people understand money through that dignity and the language of money, and how far are they prepared to go to provide a dignified banking service? The world is changing. People are changing. We are in a crisis of unemployment, and people need to take control of their own finances. How far are they prepared to go? I know some banks are working in the schools with us. But the majority of banks are not on board yet. I'm not going to name the banks who are on board. The Banking Association of South Africa is one of our major partners. But banks are taking a bit long to come to the party, and to send their people into the schools, into the shelters, into the centers for abused women, into the prisons. You must know those prisoners are not going to stay there all their lives. They're coming out, and we are expecting them to form part of our society again. So how far are they prepared to go? They're talking about top markets.
All right, let's do this. All right. Okay, let's do this. I'm running out of time, so let me put you on hold because I'd actually like to speak to you about the work that you are doing. So let's put you on hold, take your contact details. I'll get your question answered because I think it's very important, given the stats here that 46% of those surveyed, so it could be higher if one had a bigger sample, are frustrated with fees and tricky literature. And that's the key, the tricky literature. And we'll deal with that in a moment. I'm going to give my guests a chance to respond to the issues raised, and we'll take more calls.
Morning Talk on SAFM. Call 0891 104 207. SMS 34701.
Talking about the Speak Up report, an insight study that asked South Africans to help reimage banking. It aims to draw attention to what people want from their bank and ultimately help give them what they really need. So I'm going to take just one more call from Osman in Ladysmith, and then I'll get my guests to respond to the issues raised so far. Osman, good morning.
Good morning to you. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
All right. Siki, I've emailed you some time back, I think over a year ago, regarding the interest charges on credit cards.
Yes.
If, let's just say, for example, if you have a 10,000 rand due on a certain date, and if you paid 9,999 rand, 1 rand outstanding, the banks charge you interest on 10,000 rand, not on the 1 rand outstanding. And they say it's legal. Well, they say it's the National Credit Regulator. I've tried to phone them, waited many times on the phone without any success. So that is how credit cards work. They charge you on the total balance outstanding. So if you paid 99.9% of that outstanding amount, they still charge you on the total amount of the interest.
I remember,
which is daylight robbery.
I think when we spoke to the Banking Association, they said
I think
that's
you need to
what's
get
done.
the banks and the National Credit Regulator, because look, fortunately, I can pay my account on due date. There was just once when I was gone overseas when this happened, and I was very, very, cross about it. But I feel sorry for the 99% of the masses that use use the credit facility on the credit card.
Yeah, and I remember when you raised it the first time, and we spoke to the banking association.
I might have not been in the country. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, we definitely spoke about it.
You need to bring the national credit regulator again, and change this legal robbery, legal robbery, daylight robbery.
Okay.
Of the masses. I feel sorry for the people.
Oh, thanks, really. Osman. Thanks for raising it again.
Right.
Thanks.
And I do send you quite a few emails.
Yeah, no, I know. I get them. I've got 3 actually unopened right now, so I'm going to go have a look. Yes, I saw that this morning. Thanks, Osman. Interesting because, does anyone want to jump on that one? Let me start with you, Paul. Maybe you jump on that.
It's a very risky business for people who don't understand the intricacies of how a bank account works. And this, we wonder why only half of our population is banked. Certainly, many of them simply don't earn enough to make it worth their while. But in many cases, it's a strategy it's a very rational strategy to avoid the risk involved in getting involved in financial products. One of the things that the Consumer Protection Act does talk about is making contracts and other literature available to consumers in plain language. And I think the banks have got a long way to go in getting to the detail of their products. Just the other day, I spotted something on my credit card bill. It was an annual fee of 175 Rand for a loyalty program. Now, I don't remember ever being told about this fee because, as you know, loyalty programs tend to promise a whole lot more than they normally deliver. And, 175 Rand will probably wipe out any gain that you've made from that program. So even in my position, I found it very difficult to keep up with the detail, and I quite sympathize with Osman's complaint. And
it goes with what Elroy was saying about, not just financial literacy, but just getting people to understand what money is and where it comes from.
And it relates, of course, to the issue of comparability that Advocate Pillay mentioned earlier, that what the Competition Commission has asked the banks to look at is helping consumers to compare one product with another. One of the reasons why people in our survey don't move accounts is simply that it's too difficult to compare different accounts. So if you do move, you never know that you're going to get a better deal. And banks, of course, do this to differentiate their different markets. It's not in their interests to make it easy for you to compare. They try and change your mind on sort of a gut level of how you like the brand and the product.
Advocate?
I mentioned to you earlier what my mandate is. I think I should just also elaborate and say to you that I am not a consumer advocate. I also don't advance the interests of the banks. My office is independent and impartial. Having said that, I agree with Elroy that there's a huge need for financial literacy and financial education. My understanding is that the banks do a lot of work around that, but my sense is that Paul's office could probably do a lot there as well. With regards to Osman's complaint, it's once again a manifestation of a lack of financial literacy, that people don't understand how the credit card charges work. The example mentioned by Paul of having been bowled for a loyalty program seems to me similar to a negative option marketing, but a lot of that sort of marketing is now outlawed by the Consumer Protection Act. So that's unlikely to happen in future. The gentleman from East London fundamentally said what the report found, that people are unhappy fundamentally about bank charges and secondly about service. Also, once again, nothing new. But I'm inclined to feel that the respondents who say we want more personal face-to-face interaction and at the same time we want our bank fees to be reduced it's somewhat of a contradiction and is unlikely to happen. My sense is that we will become more electronic, not less. So I think the banking population ought to or needs to accept that we will be becoming more electronic, not less, and that is highly unlikely that you will get to meet a bank manager in the form of a actual human being.
A person who knows you by name.
Yes.
Charles, just on that point
yes.
That the advocate is making, people find interesting, just in the findings, that people are willing to pay for staff type costs, but they're not willing to pay for things like telephone banking, for example.
Yes. What I think how we need to interpret that is, again, the Apple example that I mentioned before. We need to listen to it, but I think what the consumer is saying is that when everything goes right, I'm quite happy with doing everything electronically, but when something is going wrong, then I want to have human interaction. And that means that the call center, the way the call center operates and interacts with the person or the branch, that needs to be addressed in some way, that the person feel that humaneness comes in when there is something happening that's not what is supposed to happen.
And your commitment then to helping people understand money and understand banking?
Yes, we, Capitec Bank does not sponsor anything like sports or any or a singing competition or anything like that. The only thing that we sponsor is financial literacy. And that's what we focus on, because we believe that if you don't give a person a fish, you basically teach them to fish, and then they will always have food.
Let's read some of your SMSs sent through to 34701. John says, my bank asks how they can help me, but spend millions advertising for new clients while messing up existing clients' accounts. Joe says, I switched to Capitec and have never looked back. G says, the financial advisors' fees are so high. How can one ever save? They're taking all my money. Brigitte says, the mess that FNB made with 3 of my accounts you would not believe. Maswabi in the Free State says, I changed Standard Bank to FNB due to scams, debit orders and insurance, taking money without my permission. FNB is better because they refund and block. And another is Joe says, APSA did not send me statements for 3 years, then tried to sue me for underpaying my bond. And someone says, Siki, I'd like to know as well, what is a banker and what is their job with regard to this topic? And someone says, why does Capitec Bank not want foreign bankers? Do you want to respond to that, Charles?
Yes, it's not a question of we don't want foreign bankers. We are one of the banks that do not have a forex license.
Oh.
So we cannot, we have to operate under strict rules and regulations of the Reserve Bank, and that is a section of the market that we can't deal with at this stage yet.
All right. Keith in PE says, excuse me, why this rip-off check deposit fee which badly affects charities, youth organizations and pensioners by stealing their funds for the shareholders? Kogi says, my state pension goes into my bank account. Will the switching code address that too? Do we know that for that?
Sorry, what was the question?
State pension goes into this person's bank account. Will the switching code address that too?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Someone says, I have accepted that my bank is my shepherd because it fleeces me regularly. And someone says, the 4 banks ran a cartel. They are happy to reverse the I do of other players except theirs. All right. Someone says, I like Capitec. And someone says, banks don't know how to treat customers. They can't even write a letter, but they send rude SMSs with poor grammar. If you're going to send a rude SMS, make sure your grammar is correct, bankers. And someone says, how are smaller financial players supposed to survive with such a cartel among the 4 banks? Cartwright in PE says, I have a friend who was working in a bank and he said bankers make the mafia look like angels. There's not a lot of love, Charles, for banks.
No, it seems like it's a grudge purchase.
It's like insurance, isn't it?
And that is what we need to change. And I think the way to change it is to be extremely transparent about what you offer and what the consumer needs to pay and what he's getting for that amount that he's paying. Yeah. Because if you look at the end of the month and you go into any of the traditional banks, you see quite a long queue at the inquiries counter. And the reason for that is because people don't understand what's happening on their statement. And I think if we take that out, then we have already really, really achieved a lot.
All right. Well, I'm going to hear what my guests think about this lack of love for bankers. But let's hear from Len in Cape Town. Hi, Len.
Ziggy, finally, 15 minutes. It's well worth the wait, though. I want to split my comments into two sections, one service and then second charges. In terms of service, I bank Standard, ABSA and Nedbank. People have to decide which is the best of the worst, because believe me, they are all the worst. All right? I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
ABSA in Sea Point, Cape Town. Yeah. Provision for 7 windows, they would never ever have more than 3 working. And when you, I make a hell of a noise there, and people just throw their hands up, all bank staff. Why? They haven't got staff. Totally unacceptable. So in terms of service, absolute disgrace. In terms of costs, the only thing that the banks have not worked out yet how to charge their customers, if you're standing in one of these long queues and you break wind, they haven't yet worked out how to charge you, but I believe they're working on it. In terms of actual charges, we're the only country in the world that where we've got to pay to deposit our cash and then pay to take it out again. They've now introduced where you have to pay if you deposit somebody else's check into your account. Then fees, transaction fees, cash deposit fee, this fee, that fee. It's actually a disgrace. And I have a theory. Government can do something about this if they want to. They won't, and they don't, for the plain and simple reason that the more the turnover the banks do, the higher the VAT they'll pay, the higher the profits, the higher the tax they'll pay.
Let me give you the stat here, Len, that says 50% of people say that banks make them pay for keeping their cash. So you're not the only one who complains about that.
Disgrace.
All right. Thanks, Len. Thanks for your call. Anne in Mpumalanga, morning.
Good morning, Siki. Siki, I want to ask the question. And I'm asking this question because of a student who was phoned by Platinum. And, I tried to get where I had everything written down. I can't find it. But anyway, he was phoned. This is down in the Eastern Cape. In King Williamstown, Standard Bank. Yeah. They accepted a debit order without any signature or any permission from the student. Wow. He kept on going. I wrote to the bank. His money was supposed to be put into his cell phone. It was put into some other cell phone that didn't belong to him at all. But the bank still kept on debiting his account and then charging him when he didn't have money to meet the demands of Platinum. Now, to me, this was completely unjust. There was no signature, no permission. When they rang the young student, he's a tertiary student, he said, I have to ask my father. These were the answers that he gave. I do not want to take that up. I have to contact my father. Yet he was put on a debit order. Who signed it? Why the bank? I rang the bank and I wrote to the bank. Yet they never gave any response. When the father, he eventually, stopped the jazz. When the father went to get a loan for him for his studies, he was blacklisted by the bank for money that he owed, which he didn't owe because he never got the money that came from Platinum on the debit order. It was put into some other call. So my question is, can a bank honor a debit order that has not been signed by the recipient of the owner of the account?
Okay.
Thank you.
So the complaints, Anne, hold on. So did he complain to the bank? Did he take it further beyond that?
He took it. We didn't take it further. He took it himself personally, and I wrote to the bank, and I wrote to the firm that was taking the money from him, or that sent in the debit order on his behalf. But no answer. I got not one answer. I'd be put from one person to the other, both in the bank and both in Platinum, but especially in Platinum.
All right. Thanks for that. Thanks, Anne.
Yeah, but we did try to follow it up as much as possible. Then, after a year or so, when the father went to look for, it was about a year after that, that he discovered that he was blacklisted.
Wow. Thanks, Anne.
Right. Thank you, Siki, so much for allowing me this opportunity.
It's a pleasure.
As I said earlier, I can't resolve an individual complaint on the radio for the simple reason we only have Anne's version before us. But let me talk about the principle. In a debit order, for example, such as a gym contract, that's a contract between the service provider and the individual.
Yeah.
So if the student authorized the gym to deduct money from his account, that would be in order. The bank is not a party to that agreement. So if I authorize, a debit order is where you authorize a service provider to take money out of your account each month, a particular amount.
Yeah.
The bank simply gives effect to that instruction. The bank is not a party to that contract. So there might very well not be a signature of the student at the bank, so to speak.
So the only person, though, who can then change that would be the student.
Absolutely.
By going to the bank.
Well, by going to the service provider and the bank.
And the bank, both of them. Yeah. But the complaints mechanism, I mean, how does it work? At what point do people come to your office?
Look, the procedure is the following. You should first go to your bank. All banks have an internal dispute resolution department. You should afford or accord your bank 20 days in which to resolve your complaint.
Yeah.
If the bank does not resolve your complaint within 20 days or offers a solution or resolution that you're not happy with, you can come to my office and we'll take the matter up on your behalf.
And what's that number? And before I forget.
The number to call is, I'll give you the 08 number. It's 0860 800 900.
800 900.
Yes.
So 0860 800 900. All right, thanks for that. So, I mean, you heard from Len, and it goes with what I was saying, that there's just absolutely no love for banks.
No, I mean, there's a lot of anger out there, and you can see by the examples. But just to talk about the debit order thing again, just briefly, this is something we get a lot of complaints about. And I must say that banks really should be looking at a way of fixing it more quickly. I spent some time working in the UK, and on the one occasion that I had a problem with my bank account, you remember in the UK, individuals don't have any fees on their bank accounts. They are free, and every transaction is free.
Wow.
It's only businesses that pay. And the one occasion I did have a bank problem.
Yeah.
Somebody put a debit order or a stop order on their account, and money left the account to a name that I didn't recognize. I phoned my bank, and they said, we give that company 10 days to respond. If they cannot provide the information, the written documentation authorizing that transaction, we reverse it, and that's the end of the story. You can then take it. They can then take it up with you later, and that's exactly what they did. And I never heard from the company again. Presumably, it was just a mistake. Now, why we can't do something simple like that here, I'm not sure, but it does speak to Charles' point about, I think banks are in a position where they're not speaking enough to consumers in terms of financial education. Great to hear that Capitec is doing it, and we really hope that the Financial Services Sector Charter, which insists that banks do more in terms of consumer education. We hope to see more news of that in the coming months, as that is now being tabled. That charter is being tabled.
Why do we pay to deposit? I mean, that just never made sense to me.
Well, the banks will tell you that it costs them a person sitting there looking at your cheque and checking whether your cheque is in fact met by the amount of money in the account that it's coming from. And blah,
I don't
blah.
use cheques.
And the cash is the same thing.
Yeah.
If you put cash in, somebody's got to count it, blah, blah, blah. In other countries, it's done differently. We seem to have not got it right here.
Charles?
Yes, it is true. There's a cost, in handling cash in this country that's quite enormous compared to another country, and that is the risk profile of the country. If somebody comes to our branch, brings a certain amount of cash, that cash goes into a drop box, and a cash in transit company has to come and collect that, and that goes to a clearinghouse or a counting house, where it then gets back into the system. That costs money, and the risk in terms of handling cash in South Africa is much higher than in other countries. Wow.
Here's a question from Nick, who says, Siki, ABSA are increasing deposit fees on money market account from 0.4% to almost 1.2%, a 200% increase. How is this justified? What governs charges and how much one can charge and how much they can increase those fees? Is there a framework?
Well, as a general rule, the relationship between a customer and his or her bank is governed by the contract that you enter into at the time you purchase the product. And the contract invariably allows for changes to interest rates. For example, when the prime rate, the repo rate changes. So it's governed predominantly by the agreement. And that's why financial literacy is so important, that consumers understand what they are getting into at the inception of the relationship, and not 9 months down the line,
when suddenly there's a cost that comes in, and they realize that later. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Just to give that number for the Ombudsman for Banking Services again, it's 0860 800 900, 0860 800 900 100, 900 100, 900 100, 900 100, 900 100.